so Fever was here early, okay? Fever was here early this morning. Let me quickly share my screen. I'm like 3-4 minutes late. I got distracted. I had a hard time finding the video, but I got it. All right, so I hope this is the right video, but I believe this is when Trooper Proctor. No, this is cross-examination. That's not what I want. Yeah, I think this is cross-examination. Hold on. I don't got it. Yeah, this is cross-examination. We want to start with day 22, I suppose. Yeah, we want to start with direct. Again, cross-examination is my favorite part of any trial, but we need full context. In order to do that, we are going to, now I'm confused. Is it 23, 22? Let's try.
The Commonwealth is just seeking that the defendant produce what the Commonwealth is entitled to under Rule 14 and what every criminal defendant in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts must produce to the prosecution. It was not until the day prior to trial on April 15, 2024, that the defendant provided notice of all their experts. During jury impanelment, the Commonwealth filed a renewed motion for reciprocal discovery, and the defendant was ordered within a week to produce the expert opinion testimony that the Commonwealth is entitled to. We are now in.
All right.
Next witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor, the Commonwealth to call Trooper Michael Proctor.
All right. This witness is very problematic. I don't even know how, I truly do not know how the prosecution recovers from this witness, but let's take it away, Proctor. I want to get into cross. But again, full context. Let's see. All right, come on, Proctor.
Well, if you want to put those down there, please step up. I'm going to put your face in.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the evidence given to the court and jury in the case now and here is for the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, jurors.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Would you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Trooper Michael Proctor, Proctor.
And how are you employed, sir?
I am currently assigned to the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office in the Homicide Unit within the Massachusetts State Police.
And how long have
Trooper, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up loud, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And sir, if you want, that microphone in front of you is adjustable, so however close or far away you want. Now, how long have you been a trooper with the state police?
For over 10 years, and it'll be 5 years in September with the Homicide Unit.
Now, with reference to your work with the Homicide Unit, with the Detective Unit at the District Attorney's Office, what, if any, specialized training did you receive in regard to your work within that unit?
I've attended several homicide schools.
Hold on, I just need to go back. I started reading emails. I should not have done that.
5 years in September with the Homicide
What's up,
Unit.
Benji?
Now, with reference
You having a good day?
to your work with the Homicide Unit, with the Detective Unit at the District Attorney's Office.
So this is Detective Proctor. Okay, I want to say is. I don't need. Anyways, once upon a time, he was the lead detective in the Karen Reed case. Literally anything and everything that has been touched and screwed over in this case leads to this man here. I watched his testimony the first time around, but obviously I was not listening with a critical eye or critical ear. I was not listening with a critical ear. And I remember his testimony to be problematic, especially his communications about the defendant in this case. And again, the investigation was really shoddy, very questionable, and he had a credibility issue. But I wanted to say for some reason, I shouldn't say for some reason. As far as the jurors are concerned, though, during their deliberations, it appears as if some jurors were willing to overcome or overlook his shortcomings, despite how problematic he is. So I'm watching this, or we are watching this, pretty much looking into the future. The trial, I believe, begins today's the 11th, so it's not quite 15 days away. Okay. The trial begins April 1st, and I've always wondered if the prosecution bring Proctor back, or how exactly do they cure this Proctor problem?
What, if any, specialized training did you receive in regard to your work within that unit?
I've attended several homicide schools. I've also been certified in Celebrite software programming. I've also, in addition to homicide investigations, have worked within the narcotics unit on several different investigations there as well.
Now, with respect to your work with the detective units, as far as, do you have sort of an on-call system?
We do.
And can you explain to the jury sort of how that works, or how those specific days for your on-call duties are assigned?
Sure. So a Sergeant Buchanan usually sets the on-call rotation. It's at random, and your on-call is from 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. Any unattended death, homicide, suicide, overdose, things of that nature that comes in during that time frame, you own it. That's your call.
Now, were you working in that capacity with the detective units on January 29th, 2022?
Yes.
And at some point in the morning, did you receive a call in regard to a situation in the town of Canton?
I did.
And what, if anything, was that? When did you first receive that call?
Sergeant Buchanan called me at approximately 6:48 that Saturday morning, advised that Canton PD had a male party that was discovered in this.
If I remember correctly, going back to last week, wasn't Buchanan one of the points of contention for the defense? I believe, unless I'm messing the names up, but I believe that is the law enforcement officer that the defense was claiming was in charge of the jury.
Snow outside of a residence, and he wasn't sure what had happened. It was originally given to me as a possible medical situation.
And based on that initial call and that initial information that you received, what, if anything, did you do?
And at that point, I knew I needed to gather further information, so I contacted Detective Lank from Canton Police Department to see exactly what transpired in the morning. He had informed me that a male party had been transported to Good Samaritan Hospital with some injuries. Detective Lank didn't have much more information, so I knew I needed to contact the paramedic at the hospital, the individual who's treating Mr. O'Keefe.
Now, before we get to that, if I could, I'm sorry. As far as Detective Sergeant Lank was concerned, was that someone that you called on your own, or how did you get his information, or why did you call him specifically?
I knew he was on scene, so I called Detective Lank.
So that was some information that you had received at some point earlier, and then you contacted, Detective Sergeant Lank.
Correct.
And following that, you reached out to whom? I'm sorry.
This firefighter Anthony Flamati.
And with reference to that conversation, what, if anything, did you learn from that?
Firefighter Flamati informed me that
I'm going to allow it.
Oh, hearsay?
Firefighter Flamati informed me that Mr. O'Keefe had some injuries to his right arm, some abrasions to his right arm, some injuries to his eyes, a cut to the nose area, and he put a 10% chance of survival for Mr. O'Keefe.
And then based on that information,
area, and he put a 10% chance of survival for Mr. O'Keefe.
Oh, okay.
and then based on that information, who did you call next?
I contacted Sergeant Buchanan, advised him that this sounds like it's more than a medical situation.
And what, if any, decision did you and Sergeant Buchanan come to with regard to what to do or where to go or what the next step should be?
So there's a couple different steps. Number one, it was blizzard conditions, and we operate, Ford Fusions or Chevy Malibu. So we got authorization to use our personal vehicles that are four-wheel drive, and to meet at Canton PD and to speak with the responding officers.
And about what time was it that you and Sergeant Buchanan arrived at the Canton Police Department?
It was approximately 10 a.m. that morning.
And so, Trooper Proctor, if I could ask you, whereabouts were you at about 8:22 in the morning?
Home.
Had you shoveled out of your driveway at that time?
Not yet.
Okay.
Had you cleaned off your car at that time?
No.
So you arrived at the Canton Police Station about 10 a.m. or so. When was it that you arrived in relation to Sergeant Buchanan, if you know?
At Canton PD?
Yes.
I don't recall if Sergeant Buchanan arrived first or myself.
But suffice it to say, at some time you both arrived around 10 a.m., is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And where did you go with the Canton Police when you arrived there?
We spoke with the Sergeant Sean Good.
And what, if anything, did you learn from Sergeant Good?
Sergeant Good informed us that while he was on scene, he identified Kerry Roberts, Jennifer McCabe, Karen Reed. He also informed us that Jennifer McCabe was out early in the night at a waterfall bar in Canton with some individuals, and that she was the one who called 911 when they found Mr. O'Keefe in the snow that morning.
Now, with regard to the parties that you just mentioned, prior to January 29th, 2022, had you ever met or were you aware of either Jennifer McCabe or Kerry Roberts, or Karen Reed, or John O'Keefe?
I've never met any of them.
Okay, so obviously Karen Reed is the defendant in this case. As far as Jennifer McCabe is concerned, she is a prosecution witness. She was a friend. I don't know if they're still friends. A friend of Karen Reed. And again, apparently, according to McCabe, Karen Reed asked her to Google some terms that, may have, I don't know, I guess a search history that could raise eyebrows as far as this case is concerned.
And at some point subsequent, did you have occasion to meet and speak with Ms. Reed?
Yes,
And do you see Ms. Reed in the courtroom today?
I do.
Just for clarification purposes, if you could identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing that she's wearing.
She's seated between Mr. Jackson and Mr. Yannetti wearing a pinstripe sport coat.
So you know,
Just ask that record reflect identification of the defendant.
Yes.
Now, after you speak with Sergeant Good, did you speak with anybody else at the Canton Police Station?
No.
And where did yourself and Sergeant Buchanan go from there?
We then traveled to the home of Matthew and Jennifer McCabe.
Okay.
Now, with reference to when I say you and Sergeant Buchanan, at how long a period of time was it that you were with Sergeant Buchanan on that date of January 29th?
It's from 10 a.m. approximately when we met at Canton Police Department until we returned to the Canton Police Department that afternoon around 5:30 in the afternoon. So all day. And we also had a debrief meeting with just the troopers in my office at Canton PD. So at least from 10 to 6, 7, because we also went back to the office with some evidence.
And so from that entire time, from 10 in the morning until later on in the night, other than maybe short drives in individual cars, were you essentially with Sergeant Buchanan that entire day?
Yes, we used Sergeant Buchanan's pickup truck that entire day. I left my personal vehicle at the police department, and I rode with Sergeant Buchanan all day and into the evening.
Now, from the Canton Police Station, where did you and Sergeant Buchanan go?
The McCabe's house in Canton.
And who, if anyone, did you speak with there?
We spoke with Matthew and Jennifer McCabe, as well as Brian Albert.
And those interviews that you conducted, were they how were they conducted?
One-on-one, Sergeant Buchanan and myself kind of rotated out Jennifer, Matthew, and Brian. So first we interviewed Jennifer, and then once that was completed, we had her step out, go to a separate room, brought in Matthew, and then the same thing with Brian.
And for the balance of the interviews that you conducted several interviews over the course of your investigation in this case. Is that correct?
Correct.
And for those interviews, as far as individually done, was that primarily what you did with each of the people that you interviewed over the course of the investigation?
Yes, each interview conducted was either with Sergeant Buchanan or another trooper in one-on-one, with the exception of Julie and Chris Albert, I believe, were in the same room as us.
Now, with respect to, I believe you just answered it, but as far as each of the interviews that you conducted over the course of your investigation, was it at any point in time, was there an interview that you conducted just by yourself?
There was just one.
And who was that one that you conducted by yourself?
That took place just at the grand jury across the street. It was the Currans. I had some difficulty locating them, so when they appeared for grand jury, I interviewed them one-on-one by myself prior to their testimony at grand jury.
You had attempted to meet with them prior to them coming to the grand jury, is that correct?
Yes,
And they had not been responsive to that?
correct.
However, they were responsive to the summons, and so you interviewed them before they went into the grand jury, correct?
Yes.
Other than those, as far as Mr. and Mrs. Curran, every interview that you conducted was in the presence of at least one other trooper?
Correct.
Now, as far as you mentioned, one
You're getting
name
distracted,
that we hadn't
folks.
discussed before at the McCabe household, a Brian Albert. Prior to January 29th, 2022, had you ever met or were you aware or did you know Brian Albert?
And never met Brian Albert until that interview.
Now, following the interviews that you conducted at the McCabe household,
I don't know. Actually, when I was watching this in real time, Lally, the prosecutor, or maybe it was an accumulation of a number of things, but I thought he was doing a pretty bad job. This sounds, again, we're like what, 9 months, 10 months removed. This kind of just sounds like regular direct, but I remember the prosecutor being, he was not as how do I put it? He did not appear as skilled.
where'd you go from there?
After the interviews at the McCabe household, Sergeant Buchanan and I traveled to Good Samaritan Hospital for two reasons. One, we knew Miss Reed was there receiving treatment for Section 12. And two, we wanted to view Mr. O'Keefe.
And when you arrived at the Good Samaritan Hospital, was the defendant, Ms. Reed, still at that facility at that time?
We'd spoke with the security staff at Good Samaritan Hospital. They informed us that Miss Reed was released.
Okay.
I'll allow it, just as to where you went.
That Miss Reed was released several hours prior to our arrival.
And do you know about what time it was that you arrived, yourself and Sergeant Buchanan, at the Good Samaritan?
Maybe approximately 1 o'clock.
And you mentioned there was a second reason, and that was to view Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
That's correct.
And did you have occasion, or did you have a chance to view Mr. O'Keefe's body at the Good Samaritan?
We did.
And where was that within the hospital?
That was in the emergency room.
And when you went to where Mr. O'Keefe was, can you describe for the jury what, if any, observations you made of Mr. O'Keefe's body at the time that you observed?
The first thing I noticed on Mr. O'Keefe is he had abrasions on his right arm.
Okay.
On the top of his right arm is approximately 6 to 8, ranging from his forearm to his lower bicep. There was no injuries underneath that forearm. Both eyes were swollen and black and blue. He had a cut on, I believe it was his right nostril. Another smaller cut, I believe it was on his left eye. Those were the injuries that kind of jumped out to me.
At any point in time, did you make any observations of the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head while you were there?
I did observe blood on the back of the head. I wasn't able to tell if there's any significant trauma to the back of his head.
Now, from the Good Samaritan Hospital, yourself and Sergeant Buchanan, what, if any, items did you secure in evidence from the Good Samaritan Hospital?
So after we viewed Mr. O'Keefe's body, we observed a pile of clothes in the corner that hospital staff had cut off Mr. O'Keefe and kind of piled into the corner. The one thing that had jumped out to both of us was one sneaker. And it's
Okay.
fairly common in a motor vehicle pedestrian strike that
Sustained. Next
It's a
question.
strike.
I'll strike from fairly common, the observations.
As far as the clothing that you observed, can you describe the clothing that you observed?
yes.
Mm,
We observed one black sneaker with the Nike logo, a pair of blue jeans, a belt, boxer shorts, an orange T-shirt, and a two-tone gray, light kind of hooded sweatshirt type of material.
Now, Trooper Proctor, over the course of your career responding to unattended deaths or death investigations as a detective of the unit, how many of those have involved situations where a pedestrian was struck by a motor vehicle?
While I've been in the unit, maybe 3 or 4, and then I've other experiences on the road.
And as far as the other experiences on the road, can you expound upon those as far as how many or over what time period we're talking about?
About 6 years I spent on the road, so maybe another 3 or 4.
And with reference to those pedestrian crashes, what, if anything, have you seen in those prior investigations in regard to sneakers or footwear of pedestrians involved in motor vehicle crashes?
Objection.
I'm going to see you at side boundaries.
that's what I was about to say. Is the fans going to object or not? All right, let's fast forward.
Proceed, Your Honor.
Yes.
Now, with reference to your prior experience with pedestrian crashes involving motor vehicles, what, if any, observations have you made on those prior occasions in regard to the footwear with respect to the pedestrians in motor vehicle crashes?
In those experiences, I've observed one, if not both, pieces of footwear remained at the point of impact.
And so with respect to your observations of the clothing, there only being one sneaker at Mr. O'Keefe's property, what, if any, significance did that have to you as far as the sort of steps you took subsequent in your investigation?
That was just a little piece of evidence that Sergeant Buchanan and I picked up that
Led you to
only one
believe
piece of footwear revealed the potential of a vehicle strike.
Now, in addition to Sergeant Mechanic is one of your supervisors within the detective unit, is that correct?
Yes,
And is another one a Lieutenant Brian Tully?
that's correct.
Now, with respect to the one sneaker that was found in Mr. O'Keefe's property, what, if anything, with regard to that, did you communicate to Lieutenant Tully?
Objection.
What's the question?
That found in Mr. O'Keefe's property, what, if anything, with regard to that, did you communicate to Lieutenant Tully?
Objection.
As to how it goes to the investigation,
Yes.
I'll allow it.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what the basis for the objection is or was.
Sergeant Buchanan and I informed DLT Tully that there was one shoe at the hospital.
And with respect to Detective Lieutenant Tully, are you aware that subsequently in the afternoon that there was a search that was conducted in the area of 34 Fairview Road where Mr. O'Keefe was found?
Yes,
And are you aware of what, if anything, was recovered in the area where Mr. O'Keefe was found on that day?
Objection.
I'll allow it as to the investigation.
yes.
And what are you aware?
We were informed, Sergeant Buchanan and I were informed that SIR team and Detective Lieutenant Tully discovered a black Nike sneaker with a white swoosh logo that was a match to
Yeah,
Mr. O'Keefe's shoe at the hospital.
Now, from these items of clothing, I'm sorry, let me just let the siren hold on. Trooper, in addition to the shoe that you've already referenced, what, if anything else, did you observe about what kind of clothing and the condition of the clothing that you observed at the hospital?
The clothing seemed, it was wet. It was pretty well saturated. The right sleeve had some like cuts to it, like tears to it. There's like blood and vomit on it, if I recall.
Oh my goodness.
Those were the observations I had made of the clothing. And they had been cut due to rendering first aid as well, the pants area.
Now, subsequent to viewing these clothing items at the hospital at a later time, did you have occasion to observe surveillance video from a variety of places on the evening of January 28th into the early morning of January 29th, depicting Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you note with regard to the clothing that you observed at the hospital and the clothing that you observed in the video?
So the videos I reviewed at C.F. McCarthy's bar and the Waterfall bar were the same clothes Mr. O'Keefe was wearing that Sergeant Mechanic and I had secured at Good Samaritan Hospital.
Is the officer's name Mechanic?
Now, Trooper, I'm going to ask you some questions just in regard to securing these items specifically as evidence, but in general terms, as far as securing items and evidence within your unit. How is that accomplished? How is that done? What do you do with items that you deem of evidentiary value that you then secure?
Generally, if we take an item for evidence, we'll put it in a brown paper bag, document it, time, date, who secured that item, address, where it's discovered, and then we'll bring that back to our office, to the evidence processing area. From there, it'll go to a permanent evidence room that has triple retention. It has an actual key, a key card, and an actual access code, and only 3 members of my office have access to that room: the 2 evidence officers and Detective Lieutenant Tully.
And at this time, in January 29th, 2022, who was assigned as the evidence officers who had access to that room?
So that'd be Trooper David Ichico and Trooper Jeffrey Kukowski.
Did either yourself or Sergeant Buchanan have any access to that evidence storage room?
No.
Now, with reference to these items that were seized and, say, items that were seized subsequent during the course of your investigation, did they go through that same sort of evidentiary storage process that you were speaking about before?
Yes.
Now, with reference to, in addition to the clothing items, at some point did you come into possession and seize Mr. O'Keefe's phone?
Yes.
And do you recall where it was that you received or retrieved Mr. O'Keefe's phone from?
We received it at the Canton Police Department.
And was that prior to you going to the Good Samaritan?
After, I believe.
So following the Good Samaritan, where did you go from there?
So after the Good Samaritan Hospital, Sergeant Buchanan and I traveled to 345 Country Hill Drive in Dighton.
And why did you go to that location?
That was the residence of Miss Reed's parents' home, and having a brief conversation with Miss Reed on the phone.
What was the location of
Reed's,
who?
And why did you go to that location?
that was the residence of Miss Reed's parents' home, and having a brief conversation with Miss Reed on the phone, she informed us she was at her parents' house.
Okay.
So you had called Miss Reed, spoken to her, and informed her that you were coming there to speak with her, correct?
Correct.
And just as you had done with Ms. McCabe, Mr. McCabe, you spoke to Ms. Reed within her home?
Yes.
And who, if anyone else, did you reach out to on your way there with regard to local law enforcement as you were driving to Dighton?
We contacted the Dighton Police Department just for a couple of reasons. One, it's a common courtesy. If we're in another town, we just kind of give the local PD a heads up. But also we needed to coordinate a plow truck and potentially a tow truck as well.
And why did you need to coordinate those?
At the time, there must have been at least a foot of snow on the ground, more. And it was a dead-end cul-de-sac, so which made it difficult to navigate. So we requested the plow to clear a path for Sergeant Buchanan and I to get down the roadway, as well as clear the driveway of the residents, so the tow truck could pull into the driveway.
Now, as far as the drive from Good Samaritan, that's in Brockton, is that correct?
Yes.
As far as the drive from the Good Samaritan in Brockton to the defendant's parents' home in Dayton, about how long a drive was that, and how would you describe the weather conditions along the way?
Yeah, the weather conditions were whiteout, high winds, blizzard conditions. We had to travel very slow. It was almost about an hour to get there.
And when you arrived there, you're in Sergeant Buchanan's truck, is that correct?
Correct.
And where did Sergeant Buchanan position the truck in relation to the house at 345 Country Hill?
From what I recall, Sergeant Buchanan went down the cul-de-sac and turned around.
I'll only do this until like 9:30, so that's what, 24? It's 24 minutes left, okay?
And he actually had to let me out first because of the high snowbanks. And then he parked kind of
I have a hearing in the morning. I have a hearing in the morning, so I need some sleep.
along the snow, pointing essentially to Mr. Reed's house.
And at some point, did members of the Dayton Police come along and join?
Yes.
And do you recall who those people were?
I believe one of the officers' last name was Barros or Barrios.
And had you ever met that officer before?
No.
Now, with respect to the home, had you and Sergeant Buchanan approached the home at any point prior to the Dayton Police showing up?
I can't recall if, no, they had arrived first before we approached the home.
And when you approached the home, you went, what did you traverse? How did you get from the street to the home?
We walked down the driveway, and then we observed Miss Reed's Lexus parked in the driveway, the front of it facing one of the garage doors. That's when we observed the broken taillight on the right side of the vehicle. We then proceeded to the front door. The snow was about up to our waist, and knocked on the door and was greeted by Mr. Reed.
So as you're walking up the driveway towards the home, you see Miss Reed's vehicle, is that correct?
Yes.
And that's a vehicle that you later subsequently found to be registered to Miss Karen Reed, is that correct?
Correct.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
So I'm showing you documents, 4 pages in length. Just ask you to review that after you finish.
I don't know. I think tomorrow I'm actually just gonna just jump right into cross, because I still wanted full context though. But maybe I'll listen to this. No, I have a hearing tomorrow. I cannot listen to this while I'm at work. Let's see how much. There's a lot to it.
And do you recognize that document, sir?
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
The Registry of Motor Vehicles, it's the certified document for Miss Reed's Lexus.
Is that the plate information that's contained in there, is that the same plate that was affixed to Miss Reed's vehicle on that day?
Yes.
And that also details sort of the history or how long she's had possession of that vehicle, is that fair to say?
Correct.
Going back to, I believe, 2021, is that correct?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I will seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibit.
No objection.
What is this?
Now, with respect to Ms. Reed, at some point you go into the house, is that correct?
Yes.
And how do you enter into the defendant's parents?
So Sergeant Mechanic and I, after we had knocked on the front door, Mr. Reed directed us around the corner, opened up the garage door for us, and invited us in.
Now, if I could take you back to, I'm sorry, just as far as when you're coming up the driveway and you're passing by the defendant's vehicle, you mentioned some damage that you observed to the right rear passenger side area. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you describe to the jury what it was specifically that you observed as far as damage to that area of the vehicle?
Yeah, the right rear tail light had essentially large pieces.
What's up,
missing from it.
Jerome?
So you proceed inside the home,
All right.
and where is it? That
Have a good night, Jerome. I won't be up here much longer. I've 20 minutes, and then I have to on and do all types of things. I need to call it a night early tonight because I have a hearing in the morning. So yeah.
you're directed, and where is the defendant?
We're invited into a large living room area. Miss Reed is seated on a couch, and her parents, William and Janet, are
Thanks for checking in, though, and saying hi.
present for the conversation and kind of standing off to the side.
And that conversation goes on for approximately how long?
Approximately half hour, 40 minutes.
And when you terminate that conversation, you come back outside of the home, is that correct?
Yes.
And where is the vehicle at this point?
That is being put on the tow truck.
Now, in addition to the defendant's vehicle, what, if anything else, was taken and seized as evidence from the defendant on that morning?
After confirming the phone Miss Reed was holding was in fact hers, we told her we were seizing the phone and we'd be writing a search warrant for that.
Now, during the course of the conversation that you and Sergeant Mechanic had with the defendant that afternoon at her parents' home in Dayton, were there some questions in relation to contact information for other people that were at bars or different establishments the night before?
Yes, we asked Miss Reed specifically for some of the friends that Mr. O'Keefe was with at CF McCarthy's. One person in particular was Michael Camerano. So we observed Miss Reed enter the passcode on her phone, retrieve Mr. Camerano's phone number for us, provided to us, and that just further confirmed that was her cell phone.
Now, through your training experience, when a cell phone is seized from a person, what, if anything, is it that you do with regard to that cell phone to preserve the information on?
Well, the first thing we do is we put it in airplane mode, and then we give it to a cell phone expert in our office, Trooper Nicholas Garino, and he essentially tries to access the data in that phone
All right.
once a search warrant is obtained.
So this is the lead investigator in the Karen Reed trial. I wanted to start with a direct, but the direct is kind of slow. It's dragging. I'll just let the direct play, and then tomorrow we'll move over to cross-examination. I could not remember the full context of this trial, or at least his testimony.
Now, as far as putting that cell phone in what you described as airplane mode, what is the purpose of that?
It's to avoid if someone wants to go on a tablet or a laptop and access the information on their phone, and they can start deleting stuff off their iCloud. This prevents that.
So you secure the phone, you secure the vehicle on the tow truck, and then where did you and Sergeant Mechanic go from there?
We follow the tow truck from the address in Dayton to the Canton Police Department. We're secured in the Sally Port Bay.
And if you know approximately what time was it that you arrived at the Canton Police Department and secured the defendant's vehicle in the Sally Port Bay?
So we left Dayton around 4:16 p.m. and arrived in Canton at the police department at approximately 5:31 p.m.
And with reference to the Canton Police Department Sally Port garage, why was the vehicle taken there?
I wasn't part of that decision, but it's my understanding that it was a heated facility. The other options were, I believe, the barracks in Milton, but that's not large enough to house a vehicle that size, and it's not heated.
And in regard to the heated, what was the sort of purpose or utility of storing it in a heated setting?
Miss Reed's vehicle was covered with snow and ice at the time. It was transported from Dayton to Canton.
And with regard to the Sallyport garage area of the Canton Police Department, at some point were you inside that area?
Yes.
And what, if any, observations did you make as far as the temperature or the heating within that facility?
I don't remember the exact, I couldn't put like a ballpark on temperature, but it was certainly warmer than outside.
Now, as far as the vehicle was concerned, either on scene, either in Dayton or at the Sallyport garage, or at any point in time that you were in the presence of that vehicle, what, if any, contact did you have? What, if anything, did you do or observe Sergeant Mechanic to do with regard to that damaged area you described on the right rear passenger side?
Yeah. Sergeant Mechanic and I never touched any part of that vehicle.
And as far as the moving it from sort of the tow truck into the Sallyport area, how was that accomplished?
The tow truck driver removed it from the tow truck and pulled it into the Sallyport Bay.
Now, as far as prior to leaving that Sallyport area of the garage where the vehicle was, what, if anything, did you and Sergeant Mechanic do with reference to securing that vehicle or coordinating it off in any way, shape, or form?
We tried to set up a perimeter as best we could using caution tape, and just kind of sectioned it off with caution tape.
Now, at some point, you leave the Sallyport area, the Canton Police Station, and where did you
What's
go?
interesting, Jerome?
We had a debrief meeting. So there's other troopers. There's troopers at scene on 34 Fairview Road. There's other troopers conducting interviews. So at the end of the night, members of my office met in a conference room at the Canton Police Department to exchange information as far as what everyone had learned throughout the day.
And as far as that meeting is concerned, that's just troopers from your unit, from your office, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so there were no members of the Canton Police Department that were present for that, is that correct?
No, correct.
And do you know why that was?
They had taken a step back from the investigation. They weren't going to participate in any interviews or anything of that nature.
Why is that?
And how was that communicated to you and Sergeant Mechanic?
The best of my recollection was that debrief meeting that we were informed that essentially Canton PD would be taking a step back from the investigation, and that now this is just solely a Norfolk State Police investigation.
So before we get to sort of the debriefing and all that's covered in that, as far as when you're on call, you get a call for any kind of sort of homicide or unattended death or anything like that. You then become what's called a case officer for that investigation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And can you describe for the jury sort of what the duty or the role is of the case officer vis-a-vis the rest of the members of the unit?
So essentially, a case officer is more of a facilitator. You kind of delegate out tasks, coordinate interviews. The case officer isn't the sole decision maker. I have supervisors. I have that we bounce ideas off of. I get feedback from. I also keep them updated. It's a collaborative effort in each investigation. We're a small office, so when a homicide comes in, everyone essentially drops what they're doing, and we all work on it together. So it's a collective effort to work on these cases, and essentially, a case officer is just kind of the record keeper of all the reports that come in and video that comes in. But when it comes down to decision-making time, it's a group effort.
Now, with reference to that collaborative effort that you were just discussing and this sort of debriefing meeting, so there were other troopers doing other things or other tasks throughout the course of the day of the 29th, correct?
Yes.
And so what was sort of the purpose of or not specifically what was discussed, but in general terms, what was discussed during the course of this debriefing?
The taillight piece is found at 34 Fairview Road by CERT. The one sneaker found at 34 Fairview Road. Interviews conducted, and then your Sergeant Mechanic and I also shared everything we had kind of.
But they were saying that it's the garage or the Sally port that was warm. I don't know that they were saying it's the weather that was
I
warm.
learned throughout the day as well.
But I'm reading emails. Maybe
And
it's that.
that debriefing meeting, if you know about how long approximately did that take in this case?
I can't recall, maybe half hour.
And so following that meeting,
Oh,
where did you go
And
from
then
there?
I need to go.
Sergeant Mechanic and I had secured some evidence, the clothing from Good Samaritan Hospital, the additional sneaker found at 34 Fairview Road, as well as the taillight pieces discovered at 34 Fairview Road, and Mr. O'Keefe's cell phone and Miss Reed's cell phone, and him and I transported those to the office in Canton.
And when you transported them to the office in Canton, what, if anything, did you do with those items?
The 2 cell phones were given to Trooper Nicholas Garino, and the clothing was laid out on top of butcher paper to dry out in our evidence intake area. And then the bag taillight pieces were set aside in the evidence intake processing area. Sergeant Mechanic and I didn't have access to the permanent evidence locker area, so we just secured them in the temporary intake area.
And that leads me to my next question. As far as the area that you're talking about with regard to the clothing items and the other items that you secured beyond the cell phones, that was in a secure area of your office, is that correct?
Correct.
And by secure, I mean restricted access to the troopers within your unit, correct?
Correct. It's you need a key card, and it's also equipped with an alarm.
Now, following that, as far as these items of evidence and other items of evidence that are seized throughout the course of an investigation, how is it that they go, or what, if anything, is done, if you know, between the time that they go from this temporary storage area to the permanent storage area?
Yeah, I'm not an evidence officer. I never have been. My understanding is once it's in the evidence processing area, it gets put into the permanent evidence room that only, like I said, two troopers and a detective lieutenant have access to. And it's the evidence officer's responsibility to process that material when they see fit.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to February 1st of 2022, were you working in regard to this investigation on that date as well?
Yes.
And at some point, did you have occasion to turn your attention to February 1st of 2022? Were you working in regard to this investigation on that date as well?
Yes.
And at some point, did you have occasion to go back to the Canton Police Department, specifically in the Sallyport garage area?
I did.
Okay.
And what was the purpose of you going out to the Sallyport garage on that day?
Pursuant to a search warrant, we were processing Miss Reed's Lexus SUV.
And when you say we, who, if anyone else, was present with you, or who, if anyone else, did you contact in reference to the processing pursuant to that search warrant of the defendant's vehicle?
So we had a chemist from the State Police Lab, Ms. Maureen Hartnett, as well as a trooper from Crime Scene Services, Trooper Zachary Clark. And then later in the day, the accident recon team, Trooper Joe Paul,
What did he
as
say?
well as a
Hold on.
trooper from Crime Scene Services, Trooper Zachary Clark. And then
what's
later in the day,
going on?
the accident recon team,
Shout out to New York,
Trooper
though.
Joe Paul, had arrived as well.
Now, if I could just ask you a couple questions in regard to Crime Scene Services section. Can you describe for the jury sort of what their role is in regard to investigations that you do and how they're sort of contacted?
So in any scene, if it's required for it to be documented, Crime Scene Services will arrive. They'll document the scene with photographs. In more serious situations, in a homicide, for instance, they'll actually take video as well as dust fingerprints.
Now, with respect to this particular investigation, there were a number of different areas or different times when Crime Scene Services was contacted to document things, correct?
Yes,
And that would include at Good Samaritan when you observed injuries to Mr. O'Keefe.
correct.
That would include the autopsy that was performed to Mr. O'Keefe.
Yes,
That would include February 1st in the Sallyport garage when the search warrant is executed on the defendant's vehicle.
Correct.
That would include subsequent searches that occurred at Fairview Road. Is that correct?
Yes.
And with respect to each of those instances, if you know, was it ever the same trooper from Crime Scene Services section that came out and memorialized each of those respective areas?
Yeah, it was a different trooper each time.
Yeah, I figured.
Is that something that you or any member of your unit has any control over whatsoever as far as who shows up from Crime Scene Services to memorialize or document a scene?
No.
Now, with respect to the search warrant execution on February 1st, what I want to ask is between the time that you were in the garage on January 29th, 2022, and the time that you're there for the search warrant execution on February 1st, had you been in that Sallyport area of the Canton Police Station at any time in between?
No.
Now, with respect to that you're there for the search warrant execution on February 1st, had you been in that Sallyport area of the Canton Police Station at any time in between?
No.
Now, with respect to the taillight area on the passenger side of the defendant's vehicle, what, if any, differences or what, if anything, do you note sort of between your observations of the taillight on the 29th versus your observations on February 1st?
Yeah, the only difference from the 29th to the 1st was snow and ice had melted from the taillight.
Okay.
So as far as the condition of that particular taillight, was it in essentially the same condition that you observed it on the 29th when you observed it on the 1st?
Yes, it was still broken and large.
Okay, I suppose, I mean, this is again from the first trial, but I suppose this question was aimed at the allegation that, you know, Trooper Proctor actually broke off a piece from the tail light.
Pieces missing from it.
But as far as the broken status of it and the pieces that were missing, was it any more broken or any more pieces missing from it when you saw it on the 1st versus when you saw it on the 29th?
No.
And with respect to the taillight housing for that vehicle on that particular day, what, if anything, happened with it on that day, if you know?
The state police chemist, Ms. Hartnett, had it removed, which she brought to the lab herself.
So she had it removed it herself, and then physically took it with her when she left to the lab?
Yeah, it was with the assistance of a Canton police officer who had an auto body shop, so he's kind of well versed in cars, so he was able to assist the chemist with removing the housing unit.
Now, at any point in time on that day of February 1st, 2022, did you come into contact physically or otherwise with that tail light? Did you handle it in any way, shape, or form?
No.
Your Honor, if I may, with the court's permission, I would request to publish. Give me one moment, Your Honor. I may have one moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
2 minutes, 2 minutes, and then I need to go.
Exhibit 34. My apologies, Your Honor. With the court's permission, if I could publish a portion of Exhibit 34,
Okay.
the Sallyport video. Ms. Gilman, if I could have from February 1st, 2022. At approximately 9:12 a.m.
All right, is that him?
You can just pause it right there. Okay. Your Honor, if I may, it may be easier and more visible with this particular video with the lights on.
Okay.
Try that.
Sure.
All right. Yeah, good night, Jerome. Good night, Benji. I am calling it a night here, okay?
Trooper Proctor,
I
bring
have-
your attention to
I have to call it a night. I need to be in bed before 10:30. It takes me, usually when I get off here, it takes me another hour to get ready. So, all right, folks, I'll be back tomorrow. But tomorrow we're gonna get into cross. This was it's a little uneventful, but I had already started, and I did not want to start over. I hope you guys have a fantastic Wednesday. I'll be here 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. Okay. All right. I am up in Brooklyn. If you're somewhere here, have a good night. And shout out to Fever though, because Fever left me a message early this morning. All right, folks. I'm out. I'm out.